Today I'll be going over Chapter 3 of Nancy Rooks' book, Inside Graceland. Chapter 3 is titled Listening and Learning. Nancy says some of her happiest memories were of quiet mornings in the kitchen, sitting at the counter with Aunt Delta. Often among the first awake, they'd eat breakfast with Aunt Delta, or if they'd already eaten, just sit and have a cup of coffee with her. Nancy writes, she normally would eat the usual eggs and bacon, toast, and coffee with cream and sugar. It was not unusual for her to get up and refill everyone's cup with fresh coffee. It sometimes seemed as if she waited on us almost as often as we waited on her. It was like a family atmosphere all the time. Then, after breakfast and several cups of coffee, interspersed with watching the television sitting on the counter across from where we sat, which you can still see on the tour today, she would be off to take care of the daily activities involved in running the house. Around 10 a.m., Dodger would come into the kitchen from her bedroom impeccably dressed, wearing a lovely dress with her signature apron and matching handkerchief. She took pride in presenting herself as a proper and dignified Southern lady. Dodger's arrival sparked a second round of breakfast in the kitchen. They would serve her biscuits with red-eye gravy and coffee, then sit together drinking more coffee and talking. During those relaxed mornings around the white counter, Dodger shared many cherished stories about the Presley family. One time, Dodger said, "It was a sin that Elvis's twin brother didn't live. It was the doctor's fault. He did not have sense enough to know that there were two babies instead of one. I told Vernon that doctor was no good, but Vernon was young and didn't understand about things like that. I would have run that doctor out of town personally, but Vernon wouldn't let me do that," Nancy writes. She told us stories of Elvis growing up. He may have become a superstar later on, but he had grown up just like any other poor child during the Depression in Tupelo, Mississippi. She told us how Vernon and Gladys had not been able to afford medicine when Elvis got sick. When he got stomach aches, for example, they gave him hard peppermint candy that had been soaked overnight in moonshine to help settle his stomach. Probably not what the doctor would have ordered, but apparently it worked. Dodger said when Elvis was small, she practically lived next door to them in Tupelo. She told them, "He was so cute. He used to get mad at Gladys for whatever reason and would walk over to my house. I always knew he was super upset because he would be carrying some of his clothes in a paper bag. He'd tell me he was running away. When Gladys would find out he was with me, I would tell her to just leave him with me, and I'd bring him home after he settled down. I remember when Elvis was little, he would play with some of the neighborhood children. Right in front of their house was a ditch that frequently had water in it. One day, Elvis on a dare sat in the ditch and got his clothes soaking wet. I was looking after him that day, and I paddled him pretty good when he came inside. He cried and promised not to ever do it again. Because he looked so pitiful, I ended up crying myself." She continues, "Another time I saw Gladys spanking him. When I asked what he'd done to deserve the spanking, she told me he'd called his daddy Vernon instead of Daddy. I couldn't stand to see him being whipped, so I begged Gladys not to spank him anymore. I don't think Elvis called his daddy Vernon again until he got older." She said when Elvis was a baby, he would sleep half the day away if no one woke him, and Nancy wondered if that played a role in his sleep habits as he got older. Dodger shared that Elvis had been afraid of his grandfather, Jesse Presley, due to his heavy drinking. When he came home late at night intoxicated, young Elvis would try to hide to avoid him, and that's probably why he didn't like being around drunk people. Nancy writes, "It didn't matter if you were family or not. Elvis felt very uncomfortable around them. He came close to kicking Aunt Delta out of Graceland because of several drunken outbursts by her in front of Elvis and his friends. She was allowed to stay only after a tearful appeal by Dodger." Another story Dodger told was about Elvis singing when he was a child. "We always took Elvis to church with us, and he would sing and clap his little hands and shout, 'Hallelujah!' I can still see him getting so excited when the singing would start that he would run down to the front of the church near the choir and just go crazy with excitement. He would stand there, facing the audience, and swing back and forth to the beat of the music, totally oblivious to everyone's smiling stares." Dodger adds, "He got his singing naturally. Both Gladys and Vernon had beautiful singing voices. They were both very musically talented in their own rights. Gladys had also been an excellent dancer in her younger days, and I'm sure that had something to do with the way Elvis learned to move." Dodger explained that because her family was extremely poor, she had to learn to cook at a young age and earn money by preparing meals for sick neighbors who were unable to cook for themselves. One morning, Dodger told Nancy, "I cooked for black and white folks alike. It didn't matter. When you're poor like we were, we all tried to help each other. I had to learn to cook just so we could survive." Much later, another story Dodger shared was when she first tried cooking when she was about 7 or 8 years old. While her mother was away visiting someone, she decided to surprise her by attempting to make cornbread. Dodger said, I did not know how to fix it, but I remembered my mother mixing things together, so I mixed cornmeal and water together and cooked it. When Mama got home, I told her, I fixed some cornbread for you. Mama took a bite of it and politely said, This is really good, but next time try putting some lard and flour in it. After that, she decided it was time to teach me how to cook. She would stand me up on a wooden box next to the stove and let me watch her as she fixed meals for the family. She cooked in what I call the old Southern style, which means low and slow. I taught that method to Gladys, and that's the style of cooking little Elvis grew up on. He loved that style of cooking up to the day he died. Dodger would eventually teach Nancy how to prepare certain foods like fried green tomatoes, fried lettuce, old-fashioned tomato soup, and ham gravy. Okay, I'm curious about this fried lettuce. I have to look it up now. I've never heard of it. Nancy says Dodger insisted on eating ham hocks only when they were cold, and pork was only good when it was cooked long and slow until it was nice and tender. Dodger told Nancy about the different cravings she would have with each pregnancy. Dodger said, When I was pregnant with Vernon, I had a craving for snuff. With Gladys, one of her daughters, it was fish, while Vester made me crave whiskey. She then laughed as she finished with Nash. She made me crave dirt, Dodger told her. Vernon and Delta were more like their daddy, Jesse, and Vester, Gladys, and Nash took more after me. On her upbringing, Dodger said, My mother would always call on me to do things because I found it easy to catch on to things. I would always get up first in the morning and get the fire going in the stove. Then we all had to get up and help saw wood, feed and milk the cows, gather eggs, and feed the chickens. It was a tough life back then growing up. The problem with today's kids is that they have it too easy. Nancy would just smile and say, You're right, Grandma. Dodger often expressed her regrets on not having a good education. Parents back then believed it was more important to work in the household than to get an education. She said, My daddy used to leave for work early in the morning to try and earn enough money so we could have clothes to wear and food to eat. He cut our hair to save money, and I was always getting a whipping because I didn't like the way he would cut it. And I would try and cut it a different way, and that would make him mad. My hair started turning white when I was fairly young, and I hated that. Nancy believes that Dodger began dyeing her hair darker later in life because she was determined not to have white hair again. Dodger also mentioned that she once suggested to Elvis that he color his hair, something he eventually began doing. One time, Dodger told Nancy, Elvis said to me, I want Daddy to be happy, but I don't like him being married to Dee. He said, No one is ever going to take Mama's place. Nancy writes, She went on to explain that after Dee and Vernon married in 1960, the two of them had moved into Gladys's old downstairs bedroom, and that Elvis had had a fit. He couldn't stand the thought of another woman sleeping in Gladys's bed. That's when the decision was made for them to build a house on Dolan Street right around the corner from Graceland. That way Vernon was still close by, but Dee wouldn't be living in Graceland. She said that it was so ironic that Vernon worried so much about Elvis and Elvis worried so much about Vernon. Dodger would also share stories about her own marriage to Vernon's father, Jesse. She explained that Jesse had another girlfriend before they married, and the woman had even made 3 wedding dresses in anticipation of a proposal. But Jesse chose Dodger, telling her she was prettier, and married her instead. The way things turned out, Dodger wishes the other girl had been chosen. Oh, but then there would be no Elvis. Dodger said of Jesse, He stayed gone half the time, and the other half he was drunk. He never left us any food in the house and did not help raise the kids. All 5 of my children got married at a young age just to get away from their father because he treated them so mean. Nancy writes, We shared humorous stories as well, like the time her daughter, Aunt Delta, when she was young, had been given a hen as a present. For some reason, the hen began losing all its feathers, and Aunt Delta had made a pair of purple pants for it. Dodger described the scene of Aunt Delta chasing after this naked hen trying to put a pair of pants on it. We all got a big laugh out of that. Another story with Dodger involved the nearly deaf elderly yard man Elvis hired. The man was very nice, and every day when he would see Dodger, he'd ask her how she was feeling. Dodger would almost always tell him, Oh, I'm not feeling so well today. The yard man would say, Good, I'm glad you're feeling better, and then walk off. It got to the point where Dodger would just smile and thank him and then whisper to one of the maids, That old coot didn't hear a damn thing I just said. Nancy says they often talked about Dodger's love of clothing. Dodger once joked that she owned a dress in every color of the rainbow, and Nancy shared that her favorite was a beautiful pink dress trimmed with white lace. After Dodger passed, Aunt Delta gave Nancy that dress because she remembered how much Nancy loved it. Nancy says she still has it to this day. I wonder if her estate still has the dress. What happens to these things when these people pass? What do they do with the Elvis memorabilia? I hope they still have it. Nancy remembers some of her sweetest moments with Dodger was the two of them sitting on the front porch watching the fans gathered at the gate. Dodger loved admiring the flowers around the porch and often remarked on how beautiful they were. Nancy writes, "We got Earl Pritchett, the yard man, to plant some flowers right outside her bedroom window so she could enjoy them after she got a little older and was confined to her bedroom so much." So I don't think Earl Pritchett is the same, the elderly deaf one that she mentioned earlier. Nancy says Dodger loved to sing, and they would often sit together at the piano in her bedroom singing while Dodger played. They sang many songs over the years, but they almost always ended with an enthusiastic performance of "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," one of Dodger's favorites. She says Dodger could play many different instruments and often tried to teach her how to play them as well. At one point, Dodger even gave her a harmonica that Elvis had given her and encouraged Nancy to practice at home. And despite trying with her husband's help, she never quite mastered it and ended up with sore fingers the next day. Dodger simply laughed and urged her to keep practicing, but she never did learn to play. Nancy writes, "Though not as heavy a drinker as Aunt Delta, she did enjoy an occasional nip after breakfast, as she used to call it. She would then sit in her chair in her bedroom and doze off to sleep. I always had to be sure I remembered to wake her in time to see her favorite soap, As the World Turns. When I would gently nudge her on the shoulder to wake up to watch her show, she would always say teasingly, 'I wasn't asleep, I just had my eyes closed for a little while.'" Dodger loved to sit in her rocking chair that sat near the foot of the bed in her room. She'd rock in it and fall asleep so that they would have to wake her to go into bed. Dodger didn't like her bed. In fact, they could only tell when she was really ill if she stayed in bed in the morning instead of getting up right away to sit in her rocking chair after she bathed and put on her makeup. Nancy writes, "We had a little game we would play sometimes in the mornings. She missed the few family members she still had and didn't get to see them very often. She had 7 brothers and sisters, and they all continued to live in Mississippi. She got lonesome on occasion and would pretend that she was still living in Tupelo and was just visiting in Memphis. After our coffee in the morning, I would take off into another part of the house to start my chores, and she would say, 'Well, it's been nice visiting. I've got to be getting home now.' And I would say, 'It's sure been nice you being here. Come back and see us.' We would both laugh, and I could tell she really missed her family." I wonder why Elvis couldn't arrange it to have Dodger visit family or have them visit Graceland. Nancy says Dodger hated doctors. Not long before Dodger passed away, Aunt Delta became concerned about her mother's health and arranged for a doctor to come to the house to examine her. The doctor told her she needed to go to the hospital, and Dodger told him, "I'm not going to any hospital. The good Lord has taken care of me this long, and I'm not going to any hospital." Dodger also had a lot of eye problems, which Nancy thinks is where Elvis may have gotten his from. Nancy remembers spending many hours administering eye drops to Dodger several times a day. Dodger told her how much she appreciated her steady hand and the care she took in helping her. One day, Dodger told her, "You do such a good job. I wish you could do it all the time. Delta feels like she needs to do it for me, and I don't want to hurt her feelings. But her hands shake so much that it spills the eye drops all over me." Poor Dodger. Nancy says as Dodger's health declined, her daughter Nash, who was an ordained minister, would gather everyone into Dodger's bedroom, and they would stand hand in hand around Dodger's bed while Nash prayed aloud for her mother's healing. In Dodger's later years, she would ask Nancy to prepare simple foods like chicken noodle soup and cut up cantaloupe for her, because those were among the few things Dodger felt able to eat. Nancy writes, "She told me on numerous occasions that it just wasn't right that Elvis and then her son Vernon should go before she did. She told me, 'I should have gone before they did. It just isn't right.' She really got distressed over it at times. I don't think she ever got over Elvis's death. On several occasions, I suggested that it might do her some good to visit his grave, along with Vernon's down by the meditation garden. But she said she didn't think she could stand seeing those 2 graves side by side." I'm so sorry. If you can hear the background noise, my neighbors, they're gardeners here today. So sorry if you can hear it. One day, Nancy and Aunt Delta convinced Dodger to let them wheel her in her wheelchair out to the graves. It was a beautiful sunny day, and they thought it would make her feel better to see how beautiful the graves were. But after a few minutes, she became so distraught that they had to take her back in the house. It took Dodger several days to recover from that outing, but thankfully her daughter was there to help care for her, and Aunt Delta did everything she could to look after her mother. Nancy says Aunt Delta had a spirited personality and was known for speaking her mind, although she would sometimes say things without fully considering the consequences first. Nancy writes, I got to know her very well shortly after going to work at Graceland. Elvis had just purchased the Circle G Ranch in Mississippi in 1967, and Priscilla and all the guys would spend several days and sometimes weeks at the ranch. Delta and I would drive to the ranch in her white Cadillac and clean up after Elvis and the group left there. During those daily drives, Aunt Delta and I became good friends, and she confided in me about a lot of things. Nancy says that some people believed Aunt Delta could be blunt and insensitive, though she personally witnessed her kindness and tenderness. While Aunt Delta struggled to form close relationships and was often seen as a loner, Nancy understood there was more depth to her than others realized. Aunt Delta would sometimes say things to Nancy that hurt her feelings, but she would later return to apologize, often offering a small gift as a way of making amends. Aunt Delta said, I don't know why I say and do the things I do sometimes. I guess I just don't think. Graceland's electrician, George Coleman, once told Nancy about an incident that happened in the office one day. He and Patsy were there talking. In the office, there was a TV monitor that was connected to a camera pointed at the front gate. Their usual mail carrier was an unusually large woman, and they watched her drop off mail and then walk away. Patsy made a joke about the woman's size, and they both laughed just as Aunt Delta walked in. Thinking that they had been laughing at her, Aunt Delta cussed them both out and then took off. Patsy had to chase her down and explain what happened. Aunt Delta later apologized to both of them. Nancy writes, her life centered around making sure things ran smoothly at Graceland. She was a stickler for details and didn't have a lot of patience when things didn't get done the way she thought they needed to be done. On more than one occasion, she herself, after a few nips of bourbon, created a small amount of damage around the house by throwing certain items of furniture toward the wall. She would then desperately call George Coleman, the ever-handy electrician on staff at Graceland, sometimes in the middle of the night, and beg him to come out and fix the damage before Elvis got home. George always showed right up and took care of whatever problems needed to be fixed. Those things always stayed strictly between her and George. Nancy says Aunt Delta enjoyed shopping and owned many beautiful outfits, but she usually dressed simply in slacks and a blouse. She had so many clothes that her personal closet couldn't hold them all, so additional garments were stored in a hallway closet. Aunt Delta was a heavy chain smoker who would often walk her dog around the backyard late at night while smoking. On occasion, she would unintentionally startle the night watchman as he made his rounds. One of the guards told Nancy that Aunt Delta was fortunate not to have been accidentally shot, since she would quietly wander the back grounds at night, walking her dog and smoking without making her presence known to security. Could you imagine if one of the guards accidentally shot Aunt Delta? Like, what would Elvis have done? But the guards were usually family members, from what I remember. Nancy explains that during the night shift, it became a concern that Aunt Delta would sometimes forget to reset the intrusion alarm leading to the jungle room after returning from her late night walks. The staff had to regularly check the alarm and gently remind her to set it. After Dodger died, Aunt Delta became the owner, and the staff had to especially remind themselves what they said to her about the alarm. Nancy writes, a small crisis developed when Priscilla began thinking about opening Graceland to the public in the early 80s. Aunt Delta considered the house to belong to her, telling anyone who would listen that Elvis had told her many times, while still alive, that she could live at Graceland as long as she wished to do so. She became very upset at times, calling Priscilla names and saying, I can't believe that they are going to open my house to the public. Don't they know I won't have any privacy anymore? My life will be miserable. I'll have to move, maybe get me a trailer. I just don't think I can take this. Nancy says that they spent a great deal of time reassuring her that she would not be forced out of the house. Eventually, she accepted that opening the mansion to tours was necessary to prevent Graceland from going into bankruptcy. But officials then faced the challenge of figuring out how to route visitors through the property without intruding on her private living quarters. Nancy writes, a number of planning meetings were held at the dining room table prior to the house being open for tours. During one such meeting, we cooked dinner for Priscilla, Todd Morgan, and several other officials as they discussed their options to open the mansion. Priscilla had flown in from Los Angeles the night before, and Patsy, Elvis's cousin, had borrowed Aunt Delta's white Cadillac to go and pick her up at the airport. When Aunt Delta found out about her car being used to bring Priscilla to the house, she had a fit. She complained for 5 minutes straight about how she didn't have any more rights at the house. Now that Elvis was gone, it took us forever to calm her down. The next day, the guests were served fried chicken, dressing, potato salad, and offered a few different desserts. Aunt Delta didn't want to confront anyone, so she stayed in the kitchen and said, "Nancy, when you take them coffee, try and listen to what they're saying." So Nancy worked recon all evening for Aunt Delta, letting her know details as they became available. At one point, Aunt Delta was invited to the meeting at the table where someone offered to buy her a new house to live in. Without hesitating, Aunt Delta said, "I already have a nice house, thank you," and then she promptly walked back into the kitchen. Compromises were eventually made and the house was open to the public. But the transition was not without challenges, particularly in the early days. The planners chose not to include the kitchen on the tour route because it was a space Aunt Delta used regularly for meals. They aimed to respect her privacy and minimize disruption to her daily life as much as possible. Nancy writes, "On more than one occasion, especially after having a few more nips, Aunt Delta would walk out into the hallway, often dressed in her robe or housecoat, her hair in curlers, and cigarette dangling out of her mouth, and tell the startled fans taking the tour to, 'Get the hell out of my house.' I often wondered what kind of thoughts went through the fans' minds as those events took place." Nancy says Aunt Delta was not pleased having what Delta called total strangers in her home. Things gradually became more manageable over time, but they remained vigilant to ensure Aunt Delta didn't unintentionally offend any paying visitors. A guest once asked one of the security guards how Aunt Delta was doing, and the guard responded, "She's fine, now that we've got the gun and bullets away from her." Nancy says after Dodger's death, the day-to-day operation of the house remained largely the same, but attention was increasingly centered on caring for Aunt Delta. Her needs became more critical as she grew older and her health declined. Nancy writes, "Near the end, she was totally bedridden, and we had to do everything for her. It was so sad watching her go downhill so rapidly. She had been so vibrant and full of energy when I had first started working there. When she died in 1993, the kitchen was added to the tour. A part of Graceland died with her, the last occupant of a grand old house that had seen more than its fair share of good and bad times. It stands today a mansion with many memories to share." That's the end of Chapter 3. Stay tuned for Chapter 4, which is titled Memories. See you then.